Hello everyone, today we're looking at our lesson on the Sudetenland. If you just direct your attention to the left of the screen, we have familiarized ourselves with the events of the Rhineland in 1936. We have talked about Anschluss in Austria in 1938, and now we're going to be focusing on this area here that's a reddish pink color. This is Sudetenland. And in doing so, we're going to talk at length about this man here. Hopefully you know him as Adolf Hitler, and this man here known as Neville Chamberlain. He was the British Prime Minister at the time. Very, very strong proponent of appeasement and keeping Hitler happy. So just reminding ourselves what appeasement was, what would Britain do if Germany wanted to conquer another territory? Well, we can look at the facts here, and we know that Germany wanted to re-enter the Rhineland, and Britain, with the policy of appeasement, didn't feel the need to stop Hitler in any way because they did feel that the Treaty of Versailles was a bit too harsh. So let's just let Hitler have what should rightfully be his, and hopefully this will stop Hitler from any further conquest. They saw this happen with Austria, and they were attempting to let Hitler have the Sudetenland, again to try to avoid war. Now, we as historians know that war happened anyways, and that appeasement did not succeed. It actually failed. But we're not going to look at this through the historical lens of what we already know. We just need to look at how the events of the Sudetenland unfolded. So a little bit of context for us. We know that Hitler wants the Sudetenland. And he wants this region here because people that live there, it borders with Germany, and they speak German. They identify as being Germans, not as being Czechs or Austrians or anything else. So in his experience with the Rhineland and Anschluss, Hitler learned a lesson. If he just wants something, all he has to do is take it and threaten further action. He doesn't have to actually go ahead and invade a country, because often that country will capitulate or surrender to him. So he looked to his conquest in Austria to formulate a plan to capture the Sudetenland. So we have to remember what Hitler did in Austria in the first place and the tactics that he had to try and take control. So we've got two questions here. What did Hitler tell Austrian Nazis to do, and how could Hitler use this to effectively take more land? So pause the video, have a think about those two questions, and we'll come back in a moment. Great, so we're looking at the two questions. What did Hitler tell the Austrian Nazis to do? He was always very vague, but he said something along the lines of cause trouble, create a disturbance, break the social peace, make it so we need to do something about the domestic issues within that country. Then we can send the Nazis in to solve it. So how could Hitler use this to take more land? He needed to create an incident where he could send Nazi soldiers into the country for the purpose of restoring order. And while they're restoring order, they could just stay there permanently. And this was his plan on how he was going to take the Sudetenland. So the crisis itself. Sudetenland is an area in Czechoslovakia where most people spoke German. Czechoslovakia doesn't exist anymore. After the war, it was broken down into the Czech Republic and into Slovakia. It was kind of split down the middle. But people who lived in the Sudetenland, they themselves considered themselves to be German. Now, in April of 1938, Hitler ordered Henlein, he was the leader of the Nazi party in the Sudetenland area, to stir up some trouble. And again, Hitler was very vague with the instructions. He didn't say exactly what to do or not do, but just cause a disturbance so I can send soldiers in. Now, because of the crisis that was started, Hitler threatened to bring his German army in to support the Germans living in the Sudetenland. And Hitler's rationale for this was there are German lives at stake and in danger. And I, as the Chancellor of Germany, need to send German soldiers to help those German people living in the Sudetenland. Now, Britain wanted to appease Hitler. They didn't want to cause a war, so they decided to hold a secret meeting to try to resolve the situation peacefully. And this was music to Hitler's ears. Yet again, he's threatening to do something, and people are going to cave and give in before he has to actually invade. So the meeting they held was called the Munich Conference, and Chamberlain called for the conference to take place to discuss the Sudetenland. So if we have a look at the image, we can see who was present here. And two faces should be familiar, and there might be two that you're not sure of. So have a look at the image on the right-hand side. We've got these four men in the front row. Don't worry about this guy. We're not going to worry about him. But these four individuals. So see if those ring true with you. So our first one, we have Neville Chamberlain. He was the Prime Minister of the UK. We had Daladier. He was the President of France. Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of Germany, and Benito Mussolini. He was the fascist dictator in Italy. And then just some guy. So looking at the people present at this meeting, we're missing someone, aren't we? Because we're discussing the removal of the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia and being handed over to Germany. So Chamberlain called for a conference. And again, he called the meeting because he wanted to make sure that the issue would be resolved peacefully. He wanted to maintain the policy of appeasement. So he met with Hitler, Mussolini, and Daladier, but he did not meet with Czechoslovakia. Now, they weren't invited to the meeting because obviously Czechoslovakia is going to say, no, you cannot give away a portion of our country to Germany. We don't want that to happen. So they simply weren't invited. The reactions to the Munich Conference. Czechoslovakia had been totally deserted. Britain and France lost a lot of vital resources in the defense against Germany. Land was also lost to Hungary and Poland at the Munich Conference. Now, when Neville Chamberlain came off the British Airways flight when he arrived back in the UK, he held a piece of paper up to the people and claimed that he had avoided war and there would be peace for the next decade. Now, what Neville Chamberlain didn't know is Hitler didn't plan on stopping with taking the Sudetenland. He wanted to take the rest of Czechoslovakia as well. But Chamberlain considered to have quite a successful meeting with Hitler, having given away the Sudetenland to the Nazis. But also he was considered a hero by a lot of people in Britain. And that was much the same in France. There was a great feeling of relief that war had been avoided. Now, in Nazi Germany, Hitler decided Britain and France would no longer oppose him. He viewed them as pretty weak and said every time that I try to take land, they'll just let me do it. So he now focused on taking the rest of Czechoslovakia. Germany took 33% of Czechoslovakia's population and most of its industry, notably a Skoda car factory that could be converted into making weapons and tanks. Hitler also gained a lot of confidence, knowing that people really weren't going to stand in his way. Now, Stalin, he was the leader of Russia. He was furious that he was not invited to the meeting because he was trying to build relationships with the UK and with France. And we'll come back to this in a couple lessons when we look at the outbreak of the Second World War and how Joseph Stalin is going to ping pong around between sides. He's going to kind of join up with Britain, then he's going to kind of join up with Germany before making a final decision. And lastly, Italy supported Hitler during the Sudetenland crisis. Relationships between Hitler and Mussolini, they grew closer, and eventually they would form an alliance called the Pact of Steel in 1939, agreeing to support each other in the event of war. So Czechoslovakia Falls in March of 1939, citing that he was restoring order, even though there was no disorder of any kind. Hitler and soldiers marched into Czechoslovakia. He did this to maintain international law, and this was his excuse for going into the country, saying there was a problem and moving his soldiers in. If there was no problem in Czechoslovakia, Hitler would technically be invading and he would be breaking international law. So he was very careful to make sure that he claimed there was a problem that he was resolving. Britain and France immediately stopped their policy of appeasement at this point. They realized that Hitler had fooled them both, and he was actually building his army further. So the policy of appeasement, as of March of 1939, is over. Hitler now turns his attention to Poland. Britain made a promise to protect Poland from any kind of German aggression. So they said, if the Nazis invade you, we will take a stand. We will no longer appease Hitler. And this was music to Poland's ears. They needed a strong ally in this event. So now that brings us to our last slide. We're going to talk about the Polish corridor and the Pact of Steel. Now the Polish corridor is this region here. It was an area that allowed Poland access to the Baltic Sea. And this is important because if you want to ship goods in and out of your country or for travel, you have access to the ocean. Otherwise, Poland would be relatively landlocked. Now, the city of Danzig was run by the League of Nations. Now Hitler planned Operation White to invade Poland on the 1st of September 1939. And he also made the Pact of Steel with Italy, where they agreed to support each other in the event of war. Now, Hitler was still convinced that Britain would not stop him if he tried to take Poland. And this is going to be a key area for Hitler to take control of. We can see we have Germany and Germany on either side. It only makes sense that this region of Poland, this Polish corridor, is captured by the Germans, allows them access to the city of Danzig, and full access to the Baltic coast. Okay, time for our bonus facts. Hitler and Stalin were more alike than they actually thought. Both of these men were effectively dictators in their respective country, Nazi Germany and the former Soviet Union. Uh, One was communist and one was a Nazi, which is essentially a national socialist. But they both had plans to invade each other's countries, even though they had signed an agreement to work together during the Second World War on common grounds and mutual interest. Now, Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union in 1941. This was Operation Barbarossa, where he was going to try to take more land from the east. This was his policy of Lebensraum to gain more living space for Germans. Now, Joseph Stalin also had a plan, allegedly, to invade Nazi Germany that was going to take place in July of the same year. So Hitler ended up beating Joseph Stalin to the punch, not by much, but by a few months. So make sure you have a look on Show My Homework, complete your quiz, and any other tasks set by your teacher.